You turn the key and you hear it. That cough, that rattle, that slow, tired crank that sounds like the whole engine is dragging itself out of bed. Blue smoke drifts up from the tailpipe. Oil disappears faster than you can pour it in. And every mechanic in town tells you the same thing. Time for a rebuild. Time for a new one. Time to open your wallet and empty it. But I am here to tell you that old engine is not dead. It is choked. It is clogged. It is buried alive under years of carbon and varnish and neglect, and almost nobody left alive remembers how to bring it back without tearing it apart. I learned that in a dirt floor workshop in Lancaster County from an Amish man who kept a single engine running for 40 years. No rebuild, no parts store, just knowledge that is quietly dying with the last men who still hold it. And before it is gone, I am going to hand you the exact method, including one trick from a 1923 formula that costs less than a cup of coffee. This works on the car in your driveway right now, today, exactly as it sits. I spent 30 years believing the mechanics. I want to tell you what I was too proud to hear until I watched it done with my own eyes. His name was Eli. I met him on a gray afternoon when my truck had stalled out on a back road near his farm, and he walked out wiping his hands on a rag that had seen more grease than soap. I expected a horse and buggy man to know nothing about my engine. I was wrong in a way that still embarrasses me, because behind his barn sat a stationary diesel engine, an old iron machine that powered his shop tools through a system of belts and air pressure. That engine was older than I was, and it started on the first pull, and it idled smoother than my truck ever had. I asked him when he last rebuilt it. He looked at me like I had asked him when he last replaced his own heart. He never had, not once. He told me that a man who understands what actually wears out an engine never needs to tear one down. And then he said something I have never forgotten. He said, "The machine does not die. We poison it slowly, and then we blame it for dying." I want you to sit with that, because everything I am about to give you comes from that one sentence, and every piece of it is fading, farm by farm, funeral by funeral, as the men who knew it pass on. Here is the first thing Eli showed me, and it is the thing that quietly kills more engines than anything else on earth. It is not driving too hard. It is not high miles. It is old, thickened, acidic oil, left sitting too long, turning into a kind of tar that glues an engine shut from the inside. Now you have heard you should change your oil. Everybody has. But what nobody tells you is what happens after decades of slightly too long intervals, of oil that got hot and cooled 1,000 times, of moisture and fuel and combustion acids blending into the lubricant until it forms a brown lacquer on every internal surface. Mechanics call it varnish. Old-timers called it gum. It coats the piston rings. It plugs the tiny oil return holes. It stiffens everything that is supposed to move freely. And here is the part that will make you angry later. That varnish is exactly what makes an old engine burn oil, lose power, and smoke. It is not that the metal is worn out. It is that the moving parts are stuck in their own filth. Eli did not use fancy chemicals. He used patience, and a principle he learned from his father, who learned it from his. Before he ever drained the old oil out of any engine, he warmed it up until it was hot. Then he added a thin cleaning oil and let the engine idle gently for 15 minutes. Just idle, no load. That thin oil crept into every passage the thick sludge had blocked and began to lift it, dissolve it, carry it back into suspension so it could be drained away instead of baked on forever. What was that thin cleaning oil? For generations, farmers used plain kerosene, no more than 1 part kerosene to 10 parts oil, run at idle only, never under load, never for more than 15 minutes. Modern folks use automatic transmission fluid the same way, because transmission fluid is loaded with detergents designed to keep varnish from forming. A quart of transmission fluid poured into your warm crankcase before an oil change, idled for 10 to 15 minutes, then drained out with the old oil, will pull out sludge you would not believe was hiding in there. I have watched what comes out. The first time I did it on my own truck, the oil that drained looked like coffee with cream that had gone sour, thick and streaked and black. And the engine, after fresh oil went in, idled quieter than it had in years. That was a machine I had been told needed a rebuild. A rebuild runs you $2,000 to $4,000, sometimes far more. That quart of fluid cost me about $7. But here is where I have to be honest with you, because a warm oil flush is only the beginning, and it will not fix the deepest problem by itself. Getting the sludge out of the oil galleries is one thing. The rings, the valves, the combustion chamber, those are choked with a harder, meaner deposit, and that is where most people give up. That is where the mechanic wins. And I need you to understand who taught us to give up, because it was not an accident. There was a time when every engine was built to be opened, cleaned, and run again for 50 years. The manuals from the early 1900s assumed you would decarbonize your own engine every year or two, the way you would clean a chimney. It was routine maintenance. It was expected. Ordinary men did it in their own barns. Then somewhere in the middle of the last century, the message changed. Engines became sealed mysteries. The word from the industry became simple. Do not touch it. Do not understand it. When it acts up, replace it. And a whole generation was raised to believe that an engine is a disposable thing, that 100,000 miles is old age, that smoke and hard starting mean the end. That belief is worth billions of dollars to the people who sell you the next engine, the next car, the next rebuild. And it is a lie. The Amish never believed it, because they could not afford to. When you cannot just drive to the dealer and finance a new machine, you learn what actually keeps the old one alive. And that knowledge got quietly buried under a mountain of marketing, until the only people who still practice it are old men in plain clothes who do not advertise anything. Eli told me his grandfather could bring an engine back from what looked like death, and I did not believe him until the day he showed me the second method, the one that restores compression. And compression is everything. Compression is the squeeze that gives an engine its power. When it fades, the engine gets weak, hard to start, thirsty, and smoky. Every mechanic will tell you low compression means worn rings and a rebuild. But most of the time, the rings are not worn. They are stuck. Piston rings are thin bands of metal that are supposed to float freely in grooves on the piston, pressing outward against the cylinder wall to seal in the pressure. After years of heat and carbon, those rings get cemented into their grooves by hard-baked deposits. They cannot press outward anymore. They cannot seal. Compression leaks past them, and the engine loses its strength. The metal is perfectly fine. It is just glued in place. Eli freed stuck rings with a soak. He would pour a penetrating, dissolving liquid directly down into each cylinder through the spark plug hole, a couple ounces in each, and let it sit. Overnight for a mild case. Days for a stubborn one. Topping it up. Turning the engine by hand now and then to work the fluid around every ring. That liquid seeps down past the piston, softens the carbon locking the rings, and slowly the rings break free and begin to move again. For generations, the soak was a home-brewed mix, and here is the one I want you to write down, because it was tested and it shocked everybody. Machinists and old mechanics compared homemade penetrating soaks against every expensive product on the shelf, and the winner was a plain mix of automatic transmission fluid and acetone, roughly half and half. In that testing, that cheap blend freed seized, rusted, carbon-locked parts with less force than name-brand penetrants costing many times more. Half transmission fluid, half acetone shaken together. A few ounces down each cylinder. Let time and chemistry do the work your muscles never could. After the soak, you drain what you can. You put the plugs back, and you start it. It will smoke like a brush fire for a few minutes as it burns off the residue. Then it clears. And when you check compression again, the numbers climb. I have seen a cylinder go from 90 on the gauge back up over 120, just from freeing the rings. That is the difference between a tired engine and a strong one. That is the difference between $2,000 and 2 evenings of patience. The first time I watched Eli do this, he did not even use a gauge. He put his thumb over the spark plug hole and cranked it, and he felt the pressure build against his skin, and he nodded like a doctor hearing a heartbeat return. 60 years of feel in that thumb, and when he passes, that feel goes with him, unless somebody writes it down. That is what scares me. That is why I am talking fast. But a stuck ring is not the only thing strangling your old engine, and if you stop here, you will only get part of the way back. Because there is another deposit in another place doing damage you cannot even see, and it is the reason so many old engines run rough, ping, overheat, and guzzle fuel. Therefore, we have to go into the part of the engine where the fire actually happens. The combustion chamber, the top of the cylinder, the valves, the piston crown. This is where fuel burns thousands of times a minute, and over the years it builds a crust of hard black carbon, like the inside of an old wood stove. That carbon is not harmless. It glows red hot and causes the fuel to ignite too early, which is that knocking, pinging sound that beats an engine to death. It builds up so thick it raises the pressure and steals efficiency. Worst of all, it collects on the valves, the little doors that let fuel in and exhaust out, and it keeps them from sealing. A valve that cannot seal is another way to lose compression, lose power, and burn fuel you paid for. Now, the old manuals treated carbon removal as a yearly chore, and the Amish, running their engines slow and steady for decades, learned to clean the combustion chamber without ever pulling the head off. They did it through the fuel, and through something even simpler that I will save for the end, because it is the piece that made my jaw drop. Through the fuel, the method is gentle and steady. You run the engine warm, and you feed a decarbonizing solvent slowly into the intake so it passes through the chambers and softens the carbon as it runs. For 100 years, farmers and mechanics used a small amount of solvent blended into the fuel to keep valves and chambers clean. There are proven products for this today, and they work, but understand what they descend from. They are the grandchildren of a formula older than almost anyone watching. Before I show you the second method, the one that brought Eli's compression back from the dead, I have to hand you the whole thing in writing, because a video can only hold so much. Picture yourself this Saturday, standing over a drain pan, watching that black sludge pour out, and then wondering, what next? Did I miss a step? That worry is exactly what my books put to rest. Plain Wisdom, Amish Depth, and the Amish Blueprint lay out these 5 plain habits step by step, with printable checklists you can tape to your garage wall, so you know how to read your own idle roughness and warning lights, instead of paying for a diagnosis that fixes nothing. They show you which items already on your kitchen and garage shelf quietly replace the $19 bottles of mostly solvent and marketing. And they give you a calm, been-there script to tell a real problem from a mechanic's upsell before you hand over a single dollar. And you do not have to take my word tonight. Go out to your car right now, pull one spark plug, and look at the tip. Black and crusty tells you carbon is choking that cylinder, exactly what this video is fixing, and it costs you nothing to check. The fastest way to get the books is to scan the QR code right there on your screen, or go to the link in the description or the pinned comment. Remember, every mile you drive on that varnish is another mile it bakes on harder, so the sooner you start, the more engine you save. And keep watching, because the very next thing I am going to show you is how Eli restored lost compression on rings everyone swore were worn out. Now, back to that second method, the one that restores compression, because this is where it stops being a story and starts being your own engine. And this is where I finally tell you about 1923. In that year, a man named Bert Pierce created a blend meant to dissolve the gum and varnish and carbon that clogged the crude engines of that era. It went into automobiles and, famously, into aircraft engines, where a stuck valve or a carbon deposit was not an inconvenience but a death sentence in the sky. That product is still sold today, more than 100 years later, and the reason it survived is simple. It does exactly what it claims. A few ounces in your oil, a few ounces in your fuel, run regularly, keeps the varnish moving and the carbon soft, so it never gets the chance to lock your engine down. Think about that. A formula from 1923, from the age of Model T Fords and biplanes, still quietly saving engines today, while the men at the counter tell you your only option is a new motor. The knowledge did not die. It just got drowned out. Now I need to stop and talk to you directly, because I know exactly what some of you are thinking right now. You are thinking, this is fine for a man with a barn and a diesel engine and all day to fiddle with it. You are thinking, I am not Amish, I do not have a workshop, I have a regular car and a regular driveway, and I have to be at work in the morning. I hear you. I thought the very same thing standing in Eli's shop, certain that none of this applied to my ordinary modern life. So this next part is for you, exactly you, the person with a daily driver, a paved driveway, and a set of basic tools and a milk crate in the garage. Because everything I have described you can do this week with things you already own or can buy for under $20 at any parts store, and I am going to walk you through the simplest version right now. Here is your weekend. On Saturday morning, before you change your oil, warm the engine up on a short drive so the oil is hot and thin. Park it. Pour in 1 quart of automatic transmission fluid, or a proper engine flush if you prefer, and let it idle in the driveway for 10 minutes. No more. No revving, just a gentle idle while it cleans the passages inside. Then drain the oil while it is still warm so all that loosened sludge flows out with it. Put in a fresh filter and fresh oil. That alone will quiet an engine and often stop it from burning oil. No lift, no special skills, nothing you have to be a mechanic to manage. Then, if your engine has been hard to start or feeling weak, do the cylinder soak. You do not need to be strong or skilled. You pull the spark plugs out with a socket, you pour a few ounces of the transmission fluid and acetone mix into each cylinder, you loosely set the plugs back on top, and you walk away and let it sit overnight. In the morning, take the plugs fully out, lay a rag over the holes, and crank the engine for a few seconds to blow out the excess. Then plug it back up, start it, and let it smoke itself clean in your driveway for a few minutes. That is it. You just did what a shop would charge you hundreds for, and you did it in your slippers with a cup of coffee. And for the carbon, the easiest thing in the world. Every time you fill your tank, you add a measured dose of a fuel system cleaner or that century-old blend, and you simply drive. The cleaning happens as you commute. No tools at all. You already know how to put fuel in a car. This is 1 bottle poured in behind it. I want you to notice something. Not one thing I just described requires a farm, a lathe, a lift, or a lifetime of training. It requires a Saturday and the willingness to believe your engine is worth saving. That is the whole secret the industry hopes you never test. Because the moment you drain that first flush and see the filth come out and hear your engine settle into a smooth idle, you stop believing that old means dead. And once you stop believing that, they have lost a customer for life. Eli did not have any of the modern products. He had cheaper things and older things, and he trusted his hands. But he told me the principle is the same whether you are Amish or not, whether your engine is iron and belts or aluminum and computers. Keep the oil clean, keep the rings free, keep the carbon soft. Do those 3 things, and the machine simply does not wear out the way you were told it must. But there is a 4th thing, and this is the one I promised you at the start. This is the piece that almost nobody knows anymore, the one that made me sit down on an overturned bucket in that shop and just stare, because it seemed impossible, and it worked in front of my eyes. I told you Eli cleaned the carbon out of the combustion chamber without ever pulling the head off. The fuel additives are part of it, but the deep clean, the one that scrubs decades of hard carbon off the valves and piston tops in a matter of minutes, He did with something I would have laughed at the day before. He did it with plain water. Now stay with me, because I know how that sounds. Water in an engine is supposed to be a disaster, and it can be, if you do it wrong. But done right, in a slow, controlled trickle, water is the oldest decarbonizing trick there is, and it goes back further than Eli, further than his father, all the way back to the great piston aircraft engines of the Second World War and before. Mechanics found that a fine mist of water drawn into a hot running engine turns instantly to steam in the combustion chamber. That steam expands violently against the carbon, and it lifts it off the metal in flakes, and it carries it right out the exhaust. Steam does not harm the metal. It scours the crud the metal is wearing. Here is exactly how Eli did it, and how you can do it, and I am going to be very careful with the instructions, because the details are what keep it safe. You bring the engine up to full operating temperature, fully warm, and you hold it at a fast idle, higher than a resting idle, so it has plenty of air moving and plenty of heat. Then, into the air intake, or into a vacuum line that feeds the intake, you introduce a thin, steady trickle of plain water. Not a splash, not a gulp, a slow drizzle, drawn in a little at a time, so the engine never floods, never bogs down, never stalls. You keep the engine speed up, you watch the exhaust, and within a minute or two you will see it come out gray, then black, then dirtier still, as years of carbon blow out the tailpipe in a cloud. The engine may stumble and surge as it eats the water, and that is normal. But the rule is simple and absolute. Slow and steady. Never a big slug of water all at once. And keep the revs up so the water turns to steam instead of pooling. A little at a time. When the exhaust runs clear and the water is gone, you rev it out clean, let it run a few minutes to dry itself, and you are done. People who do this on a rough, carbon-choked old engine describe it settling down afterward like a different machine. Smoother, quieter, the pinging gone, the power back. I found this later written up in old mechanic references, and it lines up exactly with what Eli did by memory. The steam decarbon, the water wash, the old-timers called it different names, but it is the same physics. It was standard practice when engines were precious and mechanics were craftsmen. And it faded, not because it stopped working, but because nobody makes $1 selling you a garden hose and a cup of water. That is the piece I was most afraid of losing. Eli learned it watching his father clean the farm engine every spring, a ritual as regular as planting. His father learned it in the 1940s. And when I asked Eli who else in his community still did it, he thought for a long moment and named 2 men, both older than him. 2. That is how close this is to gone. 2 old men and now you, holding it in your hands, able to keep it alive. Let me tell you what all of this added up to for me. A truck I had been quoted more than $3,000 to rebuild. A warm oil flush that cost me $7. A cylinder soak that cost me maybe $10. A bottle of fuel cleaner and a cup of water. A couple of weekends of my own time in my own driveway. And an engine that now starts on the first turn, holds its oil, and pulls like it did when it was young. I did not save a little money. I saved thousands, and I gave a good machine another decade of life, and I stopped being a man who is helpless in front of his own property. That is what Eli gave me. Not a trick, a kind of freedom. The freedom of a man who is not at the mercy of a service counter, who looks at an old engine and sees not a corpse but a patient, who understands that the machine does not die. We poison it slowly and then blame it for dying. If you take nothing else from me today, take this. That tired old engine in your driveway or your barn or your shed is very probably not worn out. It is choked, and you now know how to unchoke it, step by step, cheap and slow and sure, the way it was done for 100 years before we were all taught to throw things away. You are the kind of person who refuses to let a good machine and a good piece of knowledge die just because the world found it more profitable to forget. That is rarer than you think, and it is exactly the kind of person these methods were waiting for. So tell me one thing in the comments, and be specific, because I read them and I learn from you too. Which engine are you going to try this on first? Is it a car, a truck, a tractor, an old mower, a generator that has sat too long? Tell me what it is and what it has been doing wrong, the smoke, the hard start, the rough idle, and tell me where in the world you are watching from, because this knowledge came from one small corner of Pennsylvania, and I want to see how far it can travel. Leave that comment now, before you close the video and forget, because the people who write it down are the people who actually do it. And if you believe, like I do, that this kind of honest, proven, hands-on wisdom should not vanish with the last few men who remember it, then join us, subscribe, and become one of the people preserving what modern life is trying to erase. Because next time, I am going to show you the Amish way of storing fuel and reviving an engine that has sat dead for years, including the one thing they always do before the first crank that keeps a long-parked engine from destroying itself in the first 10 seconds. Almost nobody does it anymore. I will make sure you are one of the few who do. Now, this video showed you the idea, but inside the plain living circle, I pick up right where we left off, walking you through Eli's full engine cleaning method. And if something puzzles you, just ask me directly. A real person answers, myself or my team, never a machine. You won't be doing this alone. So many plain living folks are already in there with me. Point your phone's camera at the code on your screen. Cancel anytime with one click. Now that your engine's running smoother, let's make sure you're not pouring the wrong stuff into it. The next one shows you which fuel cleaners quietly do harm and which ones truly work. It's starting right here.